live. Cue the hold music. I've been alerted that we are live. And pause that. All right, great. So we are live. Thank you, everyone, for joining this week's Cross-Project Council meeting for the OpenJS Foundation. Today is August 13th. It is noon here in New York, 1600 UTC. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Before we get things started, does anyone have any announcements or anything that they would like to share before we get into the agenda?
Just a quick note that the standards group is meeting today at, let's see, 18.
2 hours?
Yeah, 2 hours UTC. So if anybody would like to join that, you can check out the issue on the /standards repo and get the Zoom link and that kind of thing.
Great, thanks for sharing. Excellent. I will jump into the agenda here. Again, a reminder, everybody who's on the call, to please add yourself to the meeting notes. This is the link to the GitHub issue for this meeting. It is issue number 286. There are some items that we may discuss if we have time that are not in that auto-generated list for the agenda. If we get to them, I put the link in for open issues and PRs that are labeled with the Cross-Project Council agenda. So, but jumping into the agenda as it is laid out in the issue, the first issue is 285. Excuse me. This is jQuery project infrastructure. It was opened up 3 days ago. I don't have a lot of context on this. Is Dave, are you on the call? Yep, I see you. You're here. Can you give us some context?
Yeah, essentially just trying to start a discussion here about how we can help projects in general, but also specifically the issue with jQuery is there's quite a bit of older infrastructure that's been around for a while. It probably needs to be refreshed. It would be handy to have somebody with some expertise to lend a hand there. The original ticket that I linked to is in a private repo, mainly because there's some things in there that probably shouldn't be public about the structure of the servers and such. But I think that the public link there gives you a little more of a feeling for what's going on there.
Okay. The link to the issue, is that what you're referring to?
It's
or is it the Testswarm? Got it.
Yeah, 319.
Okay.
So there's been really just 2 or 3 people who have been supplying most of the help over time, and they're overloaded and not really, not necessarily experts in the work that needs to be done here. So I don't know if there's a way we can have a pool of people who are really good at setting up some of these, especially CI/CD type systems, who might be doing it and be able to whip these things out real quickly.
Yeah, that's thank you for creating that issue and bringing it to everyone's attention. I'm looking through for an issue that I think was created a long time ago that is about infrastructure in general. And I wonder if we should start considering something of an infrastructure working group that can start to work through, what the existing needs are and how we can help with other projects taking advantage of what we have available.
We do also, I was going to chime in to add that we did start like an infra channel in Slack, also ostensibly for folks who might be interested in either getting infra support or providing infra support to projects. So, you know, that's another place that we've maybe attempted some kind of conversation here.
And quite often, I think we actually have people, we have the resources we need as far as like servers. You know, we don't have problems there. It's really more the expertise to configure and set them up, and then over time to maintain them.
Mm-hmm.
Everything seems to get security vulnerabilities in it, and sometimes the updating is a little bit tricky. I mean, there's other ways we can try to handle that. We could handle it more like a, you know, teach someone to fish type of situation if we can get some assistance from people who are experienced in infrastructure and want to provide some tutorial advice to projects. I mean, I'm trying to, just thinking in terms of how we can avoid, and maybe that's too far down the road at the moment, but trying to think of how we can avoid having, you know, 2 or 3 infrastructure people that are totally overloaded with requests from hundreds of projects by the time we get to hundreds. But it is a problem I think you see most acutely with projects like jQuery that have been around in a while. You just, a lot of it is unseen because it's projects that, you know, have needs like this, but just don't know where to go for them.
So this,
yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say that I think this seems like, you know, a big like bucket of problems to do some discovery on, and it probably does make sense for us to ask to set up a working group on this issue, because I know that, you know, from the LF side, we're certainly getting lots of support in terms of the resources, you know, servers and accounts and that kind of stuff. But it's that plan for how to put a group together to handle this, and maybe like a migration path to a more sustainable process that needs to be ironed out. And that seems like work that should very definitely get delegated.
Yeah, and I think a working group, sorry, go on.
No, just that's it. Because I'm one of these people that Dave's talking about that tries to help, but is often in over her head.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, a working group to figure out how to make this manageable and scalable and work for everyone, not a working group that does all the work and you know, gets everything dumped on them, for sure.
If I just like to say, like, for if, you know, that's the intent of the working group, I think we should also probably try to set expectations, and like with that, and specifically have things that are like a deliverable of what do we expect as the CPC, this working group, to do, and if it basically have an end in sight, and if that goal isn't met, we know that we can spin it down and begin to address something new or try to approach this differently, rather than continuing with the same thing, which is, you know, in my experience, how things have gone in other areas, not with this group, but like with others. So do you think that's something that's doable for this group, of like, have a goal of, you know, we're going to figure out, have a proposal for the CPC to have this level of infrastructure support, or, you know, whatever the actual goal is. And then if that group can achieve that, awesome. If not, we also have an indicator then that we need to approach it differently.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Definitely have a focus and achievable deliverables for a group like that. Miles, did you have something?
Yeah, just a small thing I want to caution against. Like, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, that the resources aren't the issue. It's people to do the labor and to carry the water.
Yeah.
So even if we spin up a group that has the best of intentions, If the people in that group aren't the people who are planning to do the work, we do have the risk of spending a lot of time talking about it, but not doing anything. So, you know, I just do want to caution against spinning up a group to talk about it versus spinning up a group to actually do work.
That's definitely a risk. I think if it was easy to find these people, the work could be done already, I suppose. So, you know, part of it is finding the folks that might be interested in doing this kind of work. But also, I think it would be good from a foundation standpoint to come up with some sort of policy about how we would, like, when people come asking for these things, how do we, you know, what should our response be?
So I can just touch on that quickly, Dave. I know the board is currently discussing just infrastructure in general for projects and kind of wrapping our heads around exactly what's already there, with everything that came in from the JSF, and then also figuring out what can be offered to projects going forward, because it's been mentioned a couple times that resources aren't an issue, but that may not be the case forever. So we also need to keep that in mind in terms of what is being offered as projects come in. But the board is also aware of this infrastructure issue, both in terms of just defining what is offered and also the jQuery former JSF infrastructure issues, and is trying to figure out how we can help there as well.
Is there, I don't want to kind of paralyze this into doing nothing, but is there, does a resolution need to be reached there before the CPC acts, or should we, you know, should we coordinate with whatever the board's doing? I guess. You know, kind of
Yeah, I don't think we need to wait for the board, because, yeah, I mean, I think if I'm understanding the conversation, I mean, I think this group, I mean, part of it may depend on the board in terms of what they can allocate from a budget standpoint or things like that. But I mean, I think the other side of it is just figuring out, I mean, if we can get people from the community that understand the infrastructure and can help, that's great. If it comes down to having to actually hire resources, whether that be LFIT or whatever, then that would obviously need to go through the board. But
from the Node project's perspective, this is a conversation that's gone back and forth quite a bit. I'm just trying to see if anyone else is on the call who's been part of those to maybe frame it in a way other than I would. But our build team over in Node is definitely one of the places where we don't have as many volunteers as we'd want. And even if we did have them, it's not always fair to expect volunteers to be on call. So there definitely has been conversation about whether or not we should be bringing in hired labor to handle managing infrastructure. The biggest risk of which would be kind of, you know, pushing away people who are interested in doing it as volunteers, and making them feel like they're not valued if we're going to go ahead and just, like, you know, pay another organization. The flip side being that, you know, our infrastructure, at least at Node, primarily ends up being everyone's time is eaten up just doing like the maintenance to keep the lights on, and we don't have a ton of bandwidth to invest in expanding the infrastructure.
yeah, and it's been similar on the JSF jQuery infrastructure. I mean, this week I had to jump in and help with a jQuery CDN issue. So, and it's not, I mean, that's not my expertise, and definitely.
Yeah, thanks to you and Joy, Chris, for your help this week.
Yeah.
I think some of this is, you know, legacy. I'm very sensitive to also to the point that Miles makes about, you know, paying some people but not paying other people. Ideally, it could be a volunteer where the employers are providing some subsidy there for in that person's time, and maybe there's a way we can get, you know, folks from some of the companies that provide the software to do it in return for some recognition. I don't know,
Mhm.
but it's definitely something that is going to accumulate over time. The more projects that we get, the more infrastructure we're going to inherit from those projects. And we have to figure out how we're going to deal with that.
And Dave, I personally, I mean, kind of to build on that, I think that if we think about paying people, but paying people to kind of keep the lights on, to be there on call, that could free up our volunteers to focus on moving things forward. Another thing we talked about was like using the volunteers to design the roadmap, but then like using a contractor to just like execute and get it done. But I do, I am not super optimistic that we're going to be able to find a whole bunch of volunteers that we're unaware of. But perhaps this is even something we could bring up to the LF. Maybe there are people in the Cloud Native Compute Foundation who have these skills, and maybe they need some help with something like a website. I don't know. Maybe there's a way we can collaborate with existing foundations.
Yeah, or like the CI/CD Foundation. Isn't there a new CD Foundation or something?
Yeah, that's innovative thinking right there. That sounds
Yeah.
like it might, you know, at least we know that there's the right people with the right expertise there. Now, whether we can sweet talk them into doing, you know, to helping us out is another question. But there may be some way to get that to happen. Would that be the kind of thing that we could envision this this group doing? Is trying to figure out a way to solve this problem, but not necessarily like, you know, maybe we can, you know, essentially figure out a way that we can deal with this.
Yeah, when you say this group, you mean like an infrastructure working group?
Right.
Or even, you know, just informally through the Slack channel and perhaps some ad hoc meetings or something. It doesn't necessarily need to be formally a working group.
So I would happily volunteer to organize like a first call and maybe do some preliminary just agenda making with Dave and Chris and maybe somebody from the node build side. I want to also just check in with Dave and find out like a little bit more about the urgency from your point of view. Like, is there, like, regarding the Testswarm issue, is there a real time frame? How urgent is this need?
Well, it's been going on for a long time, so it can't be that urgent. but it is. It does prevent us from doing testing in an automated way, so it's slowing our ability to, you know, put out a new release, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a few situations where we got several commits down the road, not realizing, like, we're so used to seeing test failures on some of these that we just are like, oh, it's the normal test failure, but it isn't. It's a real test failure. So I would say it is not critical, but it's one of those things that I think is causing a lot of stress for the team, and there's at least a feeling that we don't have the people we need to be able to solve it ourselves.
All right, great. Well, we're 27 minutes in. I think this is a good conversation, though, and you know, maybe we can take it over to the Slack channel infra on the OpenJS Foundation Slack, and you know, see about perhaps a meeting to discuss this further.
Okay, great.
Does that sound fair?
Mhm.
Sounds along? Great. All right, great. Well, thank you. I think it's important, and I look forward to progress on that particular issue and infrastructure overall. The next item on the agenda is pull request 279. Excuse me. This is adding a draft charter template. It's got a few approvals. Jory, I'll let you jump in here. I see that you commented a couple hours ago, and Chris as well.
So haven't had just a ton of any additional comments from last week. I wanted to await review from Chris and Michael Dawson. And I saw Chris Borchers was able to give a review. And so now I'm just waiting on Michael. I thought that would be prudent given that there are board reps to the community. Assuming there's not much else, to address from a comment or edit standpoint, then I think the next step is that we decided is that we'll send this over to Mike Dolan and Andy to get their eyes on it, make sure that there's a bit of a legal review before we send it on up to the board for approval. So I think unless there's other, maybe we can, I know Mike Dolan's on the call now, and if there's any other further input that you would have from a process perspective, but that's kind of the direction we were heading on this.
Great. Is there anything else we need to discuss on this, or do you think we can kind of just move forward and take it to Mike and Andy?
I think that's it, and unless anybody had an open question, I think that's the update.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you, Jory. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is the pull request 275. This is really kind of, pretty minor. This is a pull request I opened for updating the words, the acronym TAC to CPC in the charter. Unfortunately, it is a change to the charter. I don't know if this has been approved by the board at all yet, so it's blocked. So I guess I'm just raising it to get it on the board's radar, or perhaps I don't know if Miles, if you had sent this to the board. I remember you sending emails last week about a couple of things to the board. Or Chris, if you have anything to add here.
I have not taken it to the board, but I can.
This is the errata, just like changing the references PR?
Yeah, exactly.
There's already been an email to the board about it. There's been no word. Mike, a question for you. I know that when we merged, we changed some of the bylaws to allow decisions to be made by email. What kind of action do we need from the board to, make a decision towards charter changes if we're making those decisions in emails?
Are you asking for the board to approve a charter change?
Yes, because the CPC charter changes require board approval. I had sent an email with basically a pointer to it. It's errata. It's literally changing a couple. Joe, what's the exact substance of the change again?
In the charter, there were some references, 2 references to the TAC, and I updated that to CPC. They're literally 2 lines to acronym swaps.
Miles, in that case, I would just send an email to the board notifying them of the change of those 2 updates and just asking for their approval via email.
Which I think was done, right? So is there a process? Is it like a matter of a week with no objections, or what is the official process for that? If there is one.
That was what I.
For a board vote, you would want an actual response. So, Miles, I can take that offline with you if we're hung up on somebody not responding or something. I can reach out to them and ping them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a super minor, but I think it's a good vehicle to kind of get clarity on how that process works.
And Miles,
great.
we can also discuss what would be most useful in order to address these changes in the future too. If there's a better interface to the board that we should construct, let's just talk about what that process should look like and then get it in front of the board so we can use it.
Great. Thank you all for working on that, even though it's a super minor. I think it'd be good to know what to expect in the future for these sorts of things. Great. So the next item on the agenda is issue 207, which is closed. So, okay, great. Yeah, Jory closed that a couple hours ago.
Yes. Sorry.
What's that? Go ahead, Jory.
That was one that I was trying to mention. I forgot to mention right before the call. So on last week, Chris Hiller had shared that his concerns or his questions had been addressed on that issue. We still have the open issue about or pull request to adopt a draft charter, and we determined that we could close it last week, and it just didn't get done. So I did it this time, but reopen it
Great.
if anybody disagrees.
Yeah, great, thank you. So we had discussed early on in the meeting that before we get into reviewing project boards, that we will take a look at open pull requests and issues that have the agenda label on them. Jory went through earlier today and flagged a few things that were not picked up by the automation. So unless anyone objects or has something else they want to touch on, I'll jump into this list, and I'll share the list with the group here in chat. We can kind of pop through these and see what needs discussing. So the first one that I see is this is issue 289, maintainers versus governing body. This was opened by Toby, and since I'm unfamiliar, it was opened 6 hours ago, I will read the short description. The CPC charter defines the concept of maintainer as a collaborator elected to represent the project in an official decision-making role. Yet project progression.md more appropriately talks about governing bodies. It would be good to have the charter use governing body or similar more generic name than maintainers throughout. You can eventually add requirements with regard to representation of maintainers in the governing body if you feel like that's necessary to formalize rather than to leave as a cultural norm. I think that this is a good thing to highlight here. Does anybody have anything they want to add or more context? I know Toby's not on the call.
This struck me as something kind of similar to just clarifying, or it's not like it's kind of errata, it's kind of just a clarification, and perhaps really excellent feedback from Toby, who his projects aren't members of the foundation, but you know they very well might want to be someday. So this to me was good potential user feedback that I thought warranted discussion.
Agreed. I agree. I think it's a good suggestion. I think we perhaps just need someone to work on it. So
the action would be possibly somebody just open a PR and with some suggestions to make that clarification and go from there with our discussion.
Agreed.
Okay, cool.
So call out to anyone who wants to open a PR on that. Thank you. Let's see. The next issue is 288. There seems to be a duplicate onboarding checklist. I see, Jory, you've commented here as well. Do you want to? Oh, and Toby commented an hour ago, but would you like to?
I read that. Yeah, so this is related to the fact that, so we have an onboarding checklist, which is kept in our new project application file where projects go. Then additionally, we have created an issue template to help us with the onboarding process in our onboarding projects board. Toby's comment is it seems, extraneous to have them in two places, but then you know, from my standpoint, I'm finding it helpful. But where that checklist ends up may be something we want to determine whether we want to keep that saved
Sorry.
somewhere. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question: when is the issue template used?
We have, when we're, I guess it's only been used twice now for Mocha and for, my gosh, Architect, to start tracking that that we're getting through the onboarding steps. So I would say, like, if we were to have like a new project, one that's not already a OpenJS Foundation project, that once they pop out of the quiet you know, quiet period and into the incubating stage, we would generate this checklist for them.
So from a different angle right now, if I go to create an issue inside of the cross project council repo, I'm now presented with the project onboarding checklist, or I have to click a link below to open a regular issue. It does seem to be creating a little bit of friction for creating issues that have anything to do with something other than that, considering that we're likely to only, you know, like open these issues fairly irregularly. Do we have the intent of making like alternative issue templates to simplify that, or I guess I'm kind of erring towards, like, do we need that issue template, or is it a little overkill right now if it's kind of getting in the way of other issues as well?
Well, I mean, I'm finding it helpful, but I think I might be the only one using them. So if it's causing friction for other people, I don't mind taking a few extra steps. I'll point out that we had kind of decided that this would be a good thing a few weeks ago. And so it feels a little bit like we're not sticking with original decisions. But if I'm the only one finding it useful, then it doesn't need to be, you know, I don't need to make extra steps.
Could I ask for just Joy, what specifically about the issue template is useful for you right now?
Just to keep track of, because we have 30 something projects that need to make sure that we go through like the onboarding checklist for each of them, that they all get their charters, that they all get everything updated, and I'm just finding it very useful for that board and for those issues to exist, to keep track of everybody's state. So I know right now, for example, that Mocha and what state Mocha and Architect are in, and that I have now 32 projects that haven't gone through that yet. So that's
George, just a question. So I think to Toby's point though, do we need the template, or could it just be a copy and paste of the checklist from the application to an issue once the issue is created?
Yeah, or even I would say maybe sorry, Chris.
Well, I was just gonna say, because that's really all that's in the template is that checklist.
Yeah, but I think that it makes sense to have a template in terms of guidance, but I guess it depends on who's going to be opening these, or projects themselves. We're not expecting them necessarily to open them because they'll go through the quiet stage first. I'm kind of thinking out loud now, but I wonder about taking the checklist out, but having a link to the checklist and saying, you know, this is the checklist that we should paste here. Because I agree, having duplicate, you know, data is never good.
I mean, so it does, Jory, it does sound like the value you're getting is not necessarily the value that other people seem to have an issue with. It seems like specifically the GitHub UI and how that's structured is not working for other people, and that specific part doesn't seem to be the value that you're getting out of it. So would splitting it out into its own file and like just not calling it issue template basically be an okay thing for you? Would that, like, still having it in the repo but not having it in that specific format be okay?
I don't honestly, know. This is just like I don't honestly know.
Okay.
It's something that, again, that I've been, this is working for me, this is valuable for me, but if it is causing problems for others, then a different approach is certainly, I can just keep a copy locally and copy and paste every time I need to open an issue. That's fine.
So,
Well, I think,
just something
so
to
I'm
add.
just gonna, go ahead.
I'm not saying that we necessarily need to remove it. All I'm saying is that if we want to keep it, we should make other templates, just so it's not the only template that people are presented when they go
Yeah.
to open the issue.
And that's what I was gonna say too. I'm sorry, Miles, I'll tell them.
Yeah, and Jory, if you find it useful, while there's like a whole bunch of different tools that we can have in place to do it, if this is the way that you find it useful, we totally can stick to it. We can even update the template to have a link if that simplifies it. But to me, it wasn't so much saying like it's not useful to have that template. It's more like if it's the only template, that introduces friction. So we should just add another template that's like basic issue, or add a couple templates for the few things that people might be making issues for. So like requesting, I think like requesting regular membership might be one we might want a template for. And maybe it would just make sense outside of the context of this meeting. In a future meeting, we could just brainstorm like what are the handful of things that we want to make it easy for people to know when they're making an issue, and just make a couple more templates.
Yeah, I posted a link to the user feedback repo in Node, and I created a few issue templates there, and there is like a generic one, and I think it's handy because it has like a little thank you note in there for getting involved. So maybe that's the way forward. Like Miles said, having multiple issue templates. I'm taking a little action item to just to get that process started. Great. Do we have anything else? So I guess the one other thing I think with this issue is that the duplicate data, that there's a checklist in two places. So we may want to consider, if that's an issue at all, and how we might want to handle that. Is that accurate, Jory? As part of Toby's concern?
I think so. They're currently the same, and I mean, but I guess the question is like, first off, these issues I think are just kind of a temporary thing, right? Like, once Mocha's onboarding process is done, for example, like the issue is closed, and if something changes and we end up needing different data, or there's a policy change we need, to make sure Mocha is following, then we would open a new issue. So I unless there's a change to if there's a change to the onboarding checklist, that would probably go through our proposal process, and we would update it there. I guess what I'm getting at is I'm not entirely sure how much of an issue this is.
Yeah, the concern, Jory, is that there's two checklists, right? And so it's, if there is ever a change, somebody has to remember to update the other one.
Yeah. So I'm just going to jump in here, since it is kind of, I feel like it's in a way minor and could be easily addressed. I have two action items here to just create multiple issue templates. And then in doing so, my plan was to update the new project application to simply link to the issue template and say, this is where we're keeping the checklist for reference. Does that make sense? And I'll word it well, but if it doesn't make sense, you can comment on my PR.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I want to move on because the next issue is the proposal to lift Node.js's Code and Learn event to be an OpenJS cross-project initiative. And I think, we have 13 minutes left, and this issue could very easily eat that up. So I think Manil had to drop, if I'm not mistaken. I don't see him in the call. And I haven't been in on the discussions. If someone on the call has been in on the discussions, please feel free to jump in.
I can jump in. So we have discussed in the Code and Learn meetings some new ideas about what we can do regarding the Code and Learn at the Node.js Interactive. And we made a proposal in the Summit repo from Node.js. And now we want to, I reached out in the Infer Slack channel to get a repository for the Code and Learn for the OpenJS Foundation. And from there, we could start, formalizing the idea and inviting or asking people for proposals based on this new idea of Code and Learn.
So one question I have Rich Trott and Anna Hensington been involved in this discussion at all?
No.
So Node, Code and Learn isn't a Node project. It's actually their project. And it's not ever been made official. And so not involving them in the discussion is something that we should correct because it's not even a Node thing. It's their thing. And I want to make sure that we're actually respecting the time and work that they put into it. And I'm not trying to assert that we haven't done that, but I want to make sure that they're the ones actually being able to kind of make the calls on that because it's not even a Node project thing. It's not an official working group or project of Node at all. It's something that we've worked very heavily with them on, but I also don't want to appropriate their work.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah.
And so, as a Node project member and as a regular member of the CPC, I would very much like to see their explicit +1s on that before that proceeds at all.
Okay, I will make sure to get that.
Thank you.
Great. Is this something we want to talk about here then, or should we wait for some more conversation to happen asynchronously and perhaps discuss it further next week?
So I think it would be good to kind of, get voices from Rich and Anna. But I also found this a bit adjacent to the other another issue that's a bit older that Matteo had opened, which was the issue of whether we should bump a Summit repo. Right now, Sumit Planning is done in Node/Summit, and I think Matteo had proposed that we move that repo up to the CPC level as well. So I kind of I kind of was looking at both of these issues together as being very similar. And I just wondered if we would want to take another look at 242 and see if that's an action we can take as well. And I'll pop that into the Slack, or sorry, the.
I gotcha. I already did.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I agree. And this may kind of supersede the previous issue, but the Collaborator Summit has been functioning more, at least the last one, as an OpenJS initiative. So it makes sense to me that we take it up a level. As Michael Dawson comments on June 28th, that it would make sense to get the TSC and ComCom's approval to some extent first, and I think that makes sense. And then there's also another comment that Michael made to perhaps open an issue in the admin repo. Might be a good way to kick that off. And this one slipped through my notifications because he does mention me and Matteo about opening that issue. And the two of us helping to manage the conversation on the Node side. So I will take that as an action item, and you know, maybe both of these both of these issues can kind of happen over the next week. Let's see if the next ComCom meeting is in 2 weeks on the 22nd. But at least we can open the issue and tag the relevant groups and start having a discussion and make sure that that within the next 2 weeks we have these conversations and can revisit both of these issues. Does that make sense?
Yep, works for me.
I certainly don't want to slow, you know, the process and people thinking about these things and getting ideas and kind of fleshing them out. But I do think it makes sense to have those conversations early on. Great. Okay, so we'll do that. I have an action item to create that issue as well. And do we want to discuss these two issues any further? We have 6 minutes. The next item in this list that I'm seeing for the agenda is the jQuery project infrastructure, which we touched on, the draft charter template we touched on. Looks like all the other things we touched on. So the last one then is the last item in our agenda as well, which is the post-bootstrap project board. I'll drop the board itself into the chat. So the first item in the in progress column here is the new process for CPC reps to share responsibility for the travel fund. I've been trying to keep an eye on this. I highlighted it in the most recent ComCom meeting, and you know, I highlighted it for folks to comment on the issue itself. We didn't really have too much discussion in the ComCom call, and I am not trying to find the admin issue. Sorry, it's taking me a minute. Admin issues. There it is. The admin issue is, when I say admin, I mean the Node.js admin. It's issue 398, which I dropped into the chat. And there has not been any conversation here. I'll try to check with Matteo to see if he's brought up at the TSC. Unless anyone else on the call knows if that conversation, or at least highlighting this issue in the admin repo, has happened at the TSC level. All right, great. So, you know, I don't know how much conversation we'll have here on this, but like I said, I will take an action item to ping Matteo to ask if the Node.js admin issue has been brought to the attention explicitly of the TSC. All right. Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about on this initiative? No? All right. I'll move on. Let's see, trying to get back to the project board. Where am I? The next item in progress is add entry point for projects wanting to join on the README. This is issue number 261. Jory has some, I have a note here. Oh, and it looks like, is this, Jory, you got a commit on this issue?
Yes, I got, I added a PR just maybe an hour or so ago to add some language to the README. and pretty simple.
Okay, great. And so I'm trying to find that PR.
It was like 90 or something.
Well, I request that folks take a look at that. Oh yeah, 290. Yeah, take a look at it and see if it needs anything or give it a thumbs up. It looks like you've already got 2 approvals. And this is just to the README, so that's has a low bar. That's good. Great. Unless we have anything else, I'll move on because we have two minutes. Document/define initial process for handling reports to report at OpenJSF. This is issue number 160. And this has been kind of working through the proposal flow as a part of the COC. The next step is to, and this was a comment from 27 days ago, to PR in the CPC repo. We can comment from there. So the pull request is 271 that Manil had opened up. There are comments, but I'm not sure if they have all been addressed. There's something from Sandil with some minor comments. Yeah, and I agree with Chris here that in general it looks good for stage 1. So scrolling back to the top, we've got a few approvals. If folks want to take a look at it and put their thumb on it as well, I think it makes sense to, since we're adding this to a stage 1 proposal, that we can kind of move this forward. Unless there are objections. We are at the top of the hour. Does anyone have anything else they want to comment on this particular pull request? I think this is an important one. So if you don't, still please put your eyes on the pull request and keep your eyes out for future updates for COC work. But if there isn't anything else, I think we can call it a wrap.
One more quick thing to encourage folks, if you have time, the Collab Summit planning meeting is right after this one. So if you're interested in getting involved in Collab Summit planning, you can join that call.
Great. Is that on a calendar, Tori, or is that kind of an ad hoc meeting?
It's not on a calendar. I can see if we can get it put on the calendar.
Great.
Yeah. But you can poke me in Slack and I'll send you the Zoom link for it.
Great. And Agiri asked for a link to the meeting in the chat, but that's not going to last very long because I'm about to shut it down. Thanks everyone for joining, and check over in the Slack channels for any links or what have you. I appreciate everyone and their time. Thank you for joining, and I'll talk to you next week.
All righty. Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.